Welcome everybody to today's IWIN session. My name is Dania Ibrahim. I am currently a fellow at the Education Systems Center with Northern Illinois University. I'll be co-presenting today with Heather Penjack, who's the Director of Innovation and Implementation here at EdSystems. And today we're going to be speaking about creating more equitable CDEs, the Career Development Experience Toolkit Facilitation Guide. Today's objectives, we'll be explaining what this facilitation guide is. It's a new resource to help y'all out with creating CDEs. We'll introduce the actual guide and walk you through some components of it, highlight some equity considerations, and create an open dialogue about CDEs in different communities. Like I mentioned before, we love giving others the chance to have a platform to discuss with one another and learn from one another. But before I go into the toolkit itself, I want to pass along to Heather, who's going to be talking a little bit more about IWIN.
Yeah, hello. I almost said good morning. I always do that in these afternoon IWINs, but I know there's some new faces and new names here on the line, and so want to set a bit of context for where we are. IWIN is the Illinois Work-Based Learning Innovation Network. It's been going here for a couple of years now and really just meeting on a regular cadence to share about innovative models with work-based learning. We had that initial focus on virtual, and we continue to think about virtual, hybrid, in-person models, all the different ways that young people are engaged in really authentic work-based learning experiences across the continuum. Lots of conversations. To Dania's point here, like we do breakouts, we have communities share about what they're doing. We provide resources and state frameworks as we work within, our state agency partners and working with communities across the state as we're thinking about what is high quality work-based learning and what does it mean to provide more equitable access, really thinking about the building of social capital. I know we're going to talk a lot today and share some resources about what it means to have intentional mentorship and create some space for dialogue about that too. But really, what is that? How do we build it? How does work-based learning do that? And how does it do it in a way that's not just ad hoc and, it happens for some students, doesn't happen for all, but it really does focus in on our most underrepresented students who need that social capital. And it builds connections among you all. It's been one of my favorite parts of IWIN to hear about how communities have connected through these sessions, without myself even helping. And they're just sharing resources, learnings, and then they're coming on to share as a larger system as well. We also do, as we're thinking about what are those state policy changes, support systems, what seems to be a common need, a common challenge that's happening across the system in Illinois and where we can flag those up in our conversations and our spaces. So we're going to share this presentation, but there's a link to a resource hub for here on you that has all kinds of things across that work-based learning continuum. If you're subscribed to our newsletter, however you heard about our session today, definitely would make sure to subscribe to that. We're always going to share about sessions and resources and other components through there. But if we move forward just a bit, we are kind of thinking about this as a whole continuum, right? So we're going to focus in here today on the career development experience, which you can see is that fourth box as you move along the continuum. And that's where you're thinking about your more intensive experiences like internships, right? But there's things that build before that, right? So those of you here today who are really excited to learn about career development experiences, the best way to really have that be a high quality and really meaningful experience for your young person is they've engaged in opportunities along the continuum before that, right? So this should not be their first work-based learning experience. They should have had some opportunities in career awareness, career exploration, and team-based challenges, which are those industry mentored project team-based pieces. So really want to encourage you to, as excited as we all get about these career development experiences, do really want to make sure that we're also thinking about scaffolding that for young people, and we're engaging them in these industry areas and helping them explore and reflect and build that social capital, build that network, meet those mentors before they even move into this type of experience. And so just want to flag again, for those of you, I know always when I see kind of names I've never seen before, we have some resources here within the state, right? Thinking through the Career Development Experience Toolkit. This is what the resource today is related to. So if you are familiar with this document, if you had a chance to look at it before this session, it is big, right? There's a lot of information in there. Designing this type of experience is no small feat. And so this guide, as Dania is really going to talk you through today, is going to help walk you through that toolkit, right? There's so much great stuff in there. I continue to hear from communities how helpful it's been. as they're thinking about the design, as they're going through the implementation, as they're going through kind of that reflective process after they might have implemented a CDE or a career development experience. But this guide really helps unpack that toolkit in a way that we hope is helpful. And again, would love your feedback on that here today too. The Career Pathways Dictionary, that work-based learning continuum that was just shown, this includes all the definitions of those moments along the continuum. Again, making sure that here within Illinois, we're saying if you're doing career exploration, you're doing it with a certain minimum threshold of quality, right? It's going to have that direct industry engagement. It's going to be related to their career interest areas. So very much encourage you to check out these resources if you have not already. They very much are a foundation for the work within IWIN and work-based learning across the state. And I think with that, yes, I will turn it back to you.
Yeah, so as Heather mentioned, these career development experiences are one component along a work-based learning continuum. And before we talk about what this facilitation guide does, I do want to talk a little bit more about what a career development experience is itself and the toolkit that this facilitation guide was built off of. And so a career development experience under the Pathways Dictionary occurs in a workplace, is co-developed by education providers in a relevant field. It provides compensation or educational credit to participants, reinforces foundational and professional skills, includes a professional skills assessment, and is at least 60 total hours. So really the goal of these career development experiences is to create the ability for these students to be able to gain long-term skills and engage in a real workplace and gaining those the longevity of skills that come along with that. I do want to go back one quick slide to show you what the toolkit itself looks like. Can everybody see my screen as it turns to a different site? Perfect. Because this is what this entire facilitation guide will be built off of. And so as Heather mentioned, this experience toolkit is long and it's dense, but it's so informative. There are so many incredible gems and pieces of knowledge that have been built over time with people and with experience in this career development space. And it walks through many best practices, walks through each of the steps and every consideration that people should be taking as they are creating a career development experience. However, one of the biggest things that we think about when we're also implementing some of these programs is that those that are putting on these programs, the people that are existing in the education system, are already working so hard and are putting in many hours, and as much of a benefit as a 103-page document can be, there is also the recognition that it's challenging to get through that much dense material when there are so many competing priorities for those that work in the education system. And so the idea for this facilitation guide was born. The idea of this facilitation guide is to hopefully reduce the burden of CDE implementation. We want to walk people through all of the resources and all of the best practices in a set of actionable steps so that it doesn't feel like you're missing any part of it. So it doesn't feel like you're having to have long and extensive experience with CDEs to be able to implement effective and useful CDEs for your students. It centralizes many resources that exist in different places across the Education System Center and IWIN resource hubs, highlights best practices and creates call-out questions so that you're ensuring that you're thinking about all of your student population and not forgetting about certain students that might have different unique considerations. And helps you overall hopefully create more effective CDEs for your community. And so I want to show y'all what this facilitation guide looks like. Before you is the Career Development Experience Toolkit Facilitation Guide. And as I mentioned earlier, it very much works hand in hand with the Career Development Experience Toolkit itself. And so the way that I like to think about this guide in relation with the toolkit itself is that this 14-page document is a bit more of a checklist and a study guide for when you're entering your CDE toolkit. So you very much still will be using the CDE toolkit that I had just opened up and a companion guide, which I'll be opening right now, which includes specifically equity considerations for your students that are engaging with career development experiences, especially underrepresented students. And so it works hand in hand with these two resources such that it's calling into them and also allowing you to know what to focus on as you're going through them and sifting through all of this material. And so I want to show you a little bit about what that looks like. But before I go into it, I really do want to emphasize that this facilitation guide and the CDE toolkit in general is meant to be a supplement to what you do in your organization or your school or district already. You know your community best. You are the person that is facing the students in your community. You know their needs. You know how to consider them. And all of these things that are brought up in the facilitation guide and throughout the toolkit and the companion piece are best practices, but do not have to all be taken in the same order, do not have to all be taken in the exact same way. It's rather a tool so that you can take it and with your knowledge of your own school community, you can implement it. I'm sorry. Yes. Did somebody say, excuse me? Okay, I'll continue. Am I missing anything in the chat? Okay, I'll continue. If anybody has any questions, also please feel free to raise your hand and we'll definitely set aside some time for questions at the end. I know I'm moving through all of this a bit quickly if you haven't seen the toolkits already. But anyway, in continuation, we really want to recognize that y'all have the expertise in your communities, and you should feel empowered to be able to use these resources and best practices as it best works for your individual student population. And so what this facilitation guide really does is it takes apart every step and creates it into those actionable checklists that I mentioned earlier. So it really, first, it frames everything you need to be looking at. Before you start, it would be helpful to understand the work-based learning continuum. And to the right, it'll add resources for how to do that so that you can check off that list. It'll be beneficial to understand what a CDE is, and it will then show you a toolkit introduction, and you can click on that link and be able to check off that list. So really more like this study guide for any of y'all that are in the room that are teachers. I like to think of it this way as somebody that's a student at heart forever. I remember my textbooks and not ever knowing really how to really approach dense and long textbooks and knowing it was great information. But this really, same way as a study guide, just focuses the energy in certain areas and really helps you guide yourself through the toolkit itself. And so this guide actually not only works hand in hand with that toolkit, but rather links to specific parts of the toolkit that you should be paying attention to at that time. So I'll go down to where the organizational structure component of this facilitation guide to be able to show a little bit more about what I mean. So for example, when you're thinking about the organizational structure of your career development experience and you're exploring logistical considerations, it walks you through step by step what are different logistical considerations that you should be taking at a time. And so you'll see that things are linked in here. If you click and say, well, I want to figure out what I want to do for my space and scheduling, you'll open, it'll take you to the page of the toolkit of the full CDE toolkit that has the considerations for space and scheduling and gives you the best practices and ideas around that. And you can use that to create your own plan, then go back to the facilitation guide and be able to check that off. Same thing with transportation. You'll be able to go to the direct page that deals with transportation. You'll be able to think about the considerations and best practices that it brings up in the toolkit, and you'll be able to create a plan on your own. Another aspect of this is that it's creating, like I mentioned, call out questions and equity considerations throughout. So for example, there will be call out questions embedded within the toolkit checklists themselves, like consider how you'll track participation and success. How will you know who's accessing and who's not accessing CDEs? How will you intentionally recruit and support those that are in most need of access? And so as you go through these logistical considerations and think about transportation and think about how you're going to set this up for your students, it'll also call you out from time to time to think about broadly and based on your community itself, who is accessing, who's not able to access. Additionally, there are equity considerations after each section to do another to lengthen that call out. what we really hope for this facilitation guide and what the CDEs hopefully do in general is create opportunities for more students and create more student opportunities for students to learn about different career areas, to be able to gain connections, to be able to gain those long-term skills, to be able to imagine themselves in a career in the long term and really open up those doors for them to be able to move in that direction. But to be able to do so, we really have to think about, once again, who's getting access to these CDEs, who's actually able to engage. And so at the end of each section, there's also these equity considerations to make sure that you're not missing out on those things that you might have not thought about, like does the CDE structure somehow make it possible for students to participate? More specifically, does your scheduling create limitations for participants? An example of how it could create limitations is with this question down here. Are you able to offer CDEs during regular school hours for students that have competing priorities, for those students that are working part-time jobs and supporting their families and have other commitments outside of school? Or does your transportation plan limit any students from participating? Is it out of the way for some students? Are some students unable to afford the transportation? And so it creates those call out questions, it brings the equity considerations into one place, and it links to the larger toolkit in which some recommendations are made. So for example, with this equity consideration about the scheduling logistics and the transportation, you can also click here for potential solutions. And as you're thinking through your own plan, you also can see here that there are in the companion tool piece and in the toolkit itself, sometimes there are solutions that are provided for you as well. So it just continues to put you in the place that you're able to go to these questions and really have all of the information in front of you as you go through the guide. I will link this guide in the chat right now, so y'all can look at it on your own as well. I will not be going through the entirety of it during this call, but I do want to highlight some more things about it back in the slides. So like I mentioned, one of the big goals in being able to have this facilitation guide is to increase access for people. And so this is why those equity considerations are such a big part of the facilitation guide, when they might make up a smaller percentage of the toolkit itself or of the companion piece itself. In the facilitation guide, they make up a much larger chunk so that you can make sure that you're considering that which you might not remember to under stress or under time limitation or resource limitation. And so I'll bring back some of those questions right now. Some of them I went over. How are unique needs being addressed? Location and transportation plan being addressed, whether or not there's the ability to offer during regular school hours, how you're sharing CDE opportunities, and another very specific one about whether or not students have access to government documents to participate in CDEs. Sometimes a host organization will require that of the students that are engaging in CDEs, and just asking yourself how you, if y'all are coming in as a managing organization, are able to help address this barrier. And so these considerations, these call outs, and potential solutions are all embedded in this 14-page checklist in which you're able to have it all in one place, study guide your way through the CDE toolkit, and hopefully be able to get through it manageably and get people in your organization to engage with it thoughtfully. Another aspect that's really emphasized through this facilitation guide is mentorship. When we were thinking a lot about what separates students from having a successful experience with the career development experiences or an unfruitful experience, a lot of what changes a student's experience is whether or not they feel like they're gaining something from it, whether or not they feel like they're valued in it, and whether or not they feel comfortable and as though that they're able to learn and gain from this experience. And we want to emphasize both through the toolkit, it's emphasized throughout in a blog post that I'll link in the chat right now, and also in the next couple minutes. I want to emphasize why mentorship is such a key component of the CDE implementation. And something that I emphasize in these call out questions so often, because I really do personally believe that it's the difference between a fruitful and unfruitful CDE experience. And so some of the reasons why mentorship particularly matters for a CDE is that when students are entering, especially if we're wanting these experiences to specifically help lift up underrepresented students, it really is important to be able to frame that student thinking and help those students understand what they're actually gaining. If a student is entering a job experience for the first time and they're not entirely sure what a career could look like for them, they're not in these spaces, their community doesn't typically, to the people in their community might not have careers that excite them, and they may not know what careers are even available to them. Being able to have somebody that has worked in a job area that could be of interest of them or to them, or even just having somebody that is there to take careful consideration and hear what the student has to say and help them guide through them so they're thinking about their own self, their own skills, their own abilities, their own futures is really beneficial to them. And so this having somebody within your managing organization and thinking early on about how you're going to set up this career development experience in terms of who's going to staff it, who's going to manage the students, who's going to manage the student relationships with their employer, who's going to be checking back up on them and making sure there aren't any challenges that they're having with their host organization. It really comes back to having mentors within the managing organization that are able to be there and check in. So being able to help students understand how what they're doing in that CDE could be tied to a long-term employability competency. Being able to explain how those interpersonal skills that they're gaining are going to help them in the future. Being able to guide them through questions to understand their interests and goals, being able to guide them through paperwork specifically and some of the more challenging minutia of applying to a job or engaging in a job and paperwork. Those are the kinds of things that you can do as a mentor. And in turn, it also, like I mentioned, lifts up those underrepresented students, especially if they don't have people around them that are able to walk them through those steps and based on their individual circumstances. So given this facilitation guide and our talk about CDEs, as well as the importance of some of these equity callouts and specifically the value of mentorship in this space, we wanted to give y'all the opportunity to speak with one another and discuss some of these questions. In just a moment, Heather's going to be creating some small breakout rooms in which y'all will be given the space to introduce yourselves and your organization, talk about your successes and challenges with CDEs, and also, if there's time, also talk about how you're thinking about mentorship in your CDEs. Once again, I emphasize that because I think it's such an important part of the equity considerations and really makes experiences more fruitful for those that don't have that mentorship and don't have that guidance in the college and career space already. And that's what the hope of these CDEs is, right? So in just a moment, I'm going to give Heather the ability to put y'all in breakout rooms, and we'll be in there for just a couple minutes, and then we'll come back. It will be in there for 10 minutes, and then we'll come back and share with others.
One of the things we talked about in our room was the fact that we had students actually interview with the companies for the different internship and apprenticeship opportunities we had over this past summer. And really, instead of us placing them, it was them actually getting that real world experience of interviewing there, and then the company being able to determine which students they wanted to take on as part of that internship. So it was a little bit stronger of a connection with who they felt met their expectations or met their values of their company, and saw a much tighter job like output from there. We had a lot of good experience and a lot of good feedback from the companies and from the students as they came out of those opportunities. And we were able to get feedback from the companies and then take it back to the students privately and say, hey, here's where you could have done better, or this is where you can improve on. But it also worked to get a lot of mentorship type experiences at the company. As they've interviewed a student, now they were willing to really take them on and get them more involved within their company over the summer here. So it really worked out well for us.
That's awesome to hear. Specifically, one of the challenges that we hear from people is that the expectations between the host organization or the employer and the students is sometimes miscommunicated. And so hearing that there was a bit of a better matchup between the expectations and that the students really went in knowing what the expectations were of them and had put in that intention to work for that company is really awesome to hear. It sounds like it went really well for y'all.
Yeah, we had students actually, we got job descriptions from all the companies that wanted to offer internships over the summer. So that we were able to give that whole list to students, and they were able to apply to ones that they had already read the job description from them and said, okay, I want to apply for this one, or I want to apply for that one. And then, went and interviewed from the job from there. So really was a positive experience overall.
That's great. And it sounds like it feels like a very authentic, as much as it can be, and within that smaller scope, like an authentic look for a job that interests you, put in the application, make that decision. It sounds like the experience was really extended through them having that choice.
Yeah, and I will say this, I can't take all the credit. This IWIN group and Heather's help last year and going through all of that for the career development grant definitely helped out for us in building out that program. So for those folks that are new to this group, definitely I would say it is worthwhile. It helps build up a really strong program overall.
That's great to hear.
Appreciate the shout out, Terry. I was gonna add, our room too, I think a piece a lot is that mentor component, right? So whether that's somebody within the school who's helping to mentor students, not to put him on the spot, but like at Barrington High School, right? Greg was talking about how that's their role, right? They're going to be connecting students, getting them into those placements, doing that within the high school. But we know that's not true for every high school, right? So who is that mentor, that point of contact within the school? And how does that stay consistent, right? Regardless of, you don't just have one really motivated, excited person about internships and CDEs, but you really have a process in place. And how does that work? And where you can even think about some of your community-based partners being able to potentially serve that role, and how they can support you as well as you're thinking about capacity and bandwidth, and really creating a system for this, and not, again, those kind of ad hoc experiences as one teacher knows somebody who could take a couple of students for an internship, right? But really creating that process. But that mentorship piece, both within the school and at that industry partner, are so crucial.
We have in the summer a training for those teachers that are mentors under the education pathway, so that they know the expectations and what they need to do with those students that they do have.
That's awesome. I'm loving hearing that, like, really good setting of expectations, the clear communication. All of these are such great practices, and often things that sometimes get through the cracks. And so it actually is something that's highlighted quite a few times in the facilitation guide, and in the toolkit itself, that set those expectations early, have that open conversation, communicate with your students, communicate with the host organization, and make sure they understand that high schoolers are incredibly competent and skilled and talented, but also this might be their first job and there's still a lot to learn. And so being able to create that open communication, set those expectations with both the students and the host organization or the employer is so awesome. And then having that mentor there to help guide them through some of those challenges, whether or not those expectations are not being being communicated effectively, or if they're having any other challenge, that's where those mentors come in. So that's really awesome to hear that this expectation setting has been going so well, and that proper pre-work and training is paying off.
What we do with what we did with the manufacturers on the manufacturers pathway was we met with them when we put the handbook together. So then they gave us and gave them a checklist, and then they revised that checklist to meet their facility and what their expectations and needs were, so that everybody, when the student and the mentor that was going to be working with them, they knew what they needed to do. And a lot of the things that they were trying to work with them to start out with was OSHA and different safety protocols and things to make sure that they did those. And so that it was something they could check off.
That's awesome. We're big fans of checklists here. So that's awesome to hear. And which district or school are you coming from?
I'm coming from Leoga Whiteside Regional Office of Education.
Awesome. Thank you so much for sharing that experience with us.
Our team discussed a little bit about the challenges of COVID and the turnover with businesses and community groups, and how redeveloping those relationships is going to be key in the future. So that was kind of a common theme. And then we talked a little bit about some of the successes with the team-based challenges. So yeah, that was our group.
That's awesome to hear that you have some success with team-based challenges. All of the parts of the continuum are so important, like Heather mentioned earlier, and definitely did bring a damper on everyone when COVID came around. And I can imagine recreating those connections is very challenging. Some of the considerations actually, and I wonder if this is a benefit to some of y'all, some of the considerations for students that are not able to access some of these jobs in person is whether or not they're able to do some of them virtually. And so I wonder if anybody also had that silver lining to COVID where they were able to access things potentially more easily without having to travel to the organizations.
I am not with the school. I'm with a healthcare organization. I will say though, over the summer I had high school interns, and they were intentionally allowed a hybrid internship where they were given projects and they knew what had to be accomplished at the end, and they kind of managed their time. So a couple days they would be virtual, and some days they would come into the office. But at the end of the internship, they had definitely accomplished their goals and felt like they were better stewards of time management as a result of that flexibility, which I gave them an evaluation, tell me what you like the most. And that's what they like the absolute most. One student wrote, I thought I would hate the internship because I did not like online school. However, being able to work online and be hybrid in a job setting worked out really well for her. So I thought that was interesting, and did an excellent job. So thanks.
That's really awesome to hear. It's always great to hear after, I mean, the pandemic was horrible for all of the reasons, but it's always great to hear some small bits of silver linings coming out of it sometimes, and being able to have that hybrid, more flexible work schedule. That's and especially for it to be beneficial for high schoolers to be able to time manage, which I think is one of the hardest things to gain as somebody long ways away from high school now. That's really great to hear that it was a success for them. If anybody else has any more experiences they'd like to share, I definitely encourage you to share it in the chat, but we're going to move on to just a few more resources. But before that, I just wanted to thank everybody that spoke up and for engaging in the breakout rooms. It really is from the schools and the organizations and the districts that we are able to get the information and best practices and recommendations that we do. And so we're really grateful when y'all are able to share with us and with each other. I'll be passing it back on to Heather to talk about some resources.
Thank you. And just wanted to give a quick shout out to Jennifer and their team over at BJC. I was able to listen in on their interns presentations. Was that last week already? I guess. Yeah, it's wild where time happens. But one of the interns shared that the biggest challenges they had was prioritizing tasks. And so that it was something that struck me. I think it's something that I personally grapple with at times, right? You're like, okay, what do I literally have to get done for tomorrow? What do I have to get done for next month? And so these opportunities, right, especially when you're kind of have this hybrid, you're virtual and you're in person, right, as more and more companies, more organizations really do move to having remote work, like it is an opportunity to have that hybrid or virtual experience and help young people navigate what it means to prioritize when they're not showing up every day and someone's going to assign them a task and they're going to know exactly what to do for those 3 hours, right? There really is this remote work skill that I know I personally had to shift and adjust to back in March of 2020 and continue to adjust to as we're hybrid here, even within the EdSystems office. So again, think about your own ways that you've needed to grow as a professional and where you can encourage that within your CDEs is crucial. I do want to highlight a couple of pieces here. So Terry had mentioned that pilot. And so Valley's one of the pilot communities in Illinois here had really taken on this piece of, okay, within a CDE, right? You have this this tension to navigate of you have employer partners who want to offer and host a student, right? You have the school who has a group of students who are able to participate, right? And what does that connection piece start to look like, and that readiness piece on both the employer and the student side look like? And so they really took this on as part of their pilot to say, okay, what does it mean for an employer to be ready to host an internship? Do they have, you heard a few folks say, and in your rooms too, like, do they have a job description? Do they have a way to orient young people to their site, right? Whether that's virtual, hybrid, fully in person. Do they also communicate in terms of an organization chart, like who is the team and who will you be working with and what does everybody do? A really beautiful thing about having an in-person component or virtual as well too, right? As long as you're setting up intentionally, is a young person could complete a CDE and meet all different departments, right? And work on all different departments. And so how is the employer being thoughtful about that as they're preparing to host this young person? And so they really took this on so that they then, as Valleys, as their education system unit, they could work with those employers, make sure that they have those 3 documents in hand, and then do that more of like a warm handoff to the school, right? Because a lot of times what's happening to schools is somebody says, I got this great employer partner, and they just connect them with somebody at the school. That somebody at the school is like, I'm doing a million things today. There's a kid in my class who just like cut their hand in culinary class, and like, I can't, like, I'll get back to this employer partner. And then they don't, because it's just life, right? So how do you have a system, a space where there is this understanding of readiness on the employer, understanding then how they're getting passed up to the school with a very clear next step, that employer has thought through these different components here. And so wanted to offer up this resource for you all. It is free, right? If you wanted to do a badge or something like that for employers, I believe there's a $35 cost to get the actual badge. But you can go, you can download those different documents. There's a tons of videos and just content on there that's really helpful to you all as you might be thinking through, like Gail spoke to, what does it mean to onboard your mentors or onboard your employers? There's a lot of language, a lot of content, a lot of templates and resources within this micro-credential, and I wanted to highlight here for you all. And I'll definitely have to have the Valleys team come on at some point and talk about their work onboarding employers using this credential to IWIN here. The next thing, just wanted to flag, I think there's a good chunk of you on this call who participated in this ISB pilot grant, but last school year, the State Board of Education here in Illinois provided grant opportunity, and communities across the state piloted career exploration and career development experiences. If you don't mind actually clicking on that link there within the PowerPoint, and that'll load up here, awesome. And if you scroll down just a bit, there's some overview videos for you here, again, of that career exploration, career development experience I posted in the chat earlier. But if you keep scrolling, sorry, I didn't give you a heads up on this before today, but keep going. There'll be, keep going past the statewide frameworks. You're going to start to see here all these resources from the pilot school. So you'll see the pilot school listed, their model and related resources. And these tables are there for you for both career exploration at the start of that continuum and that career development experience. So we've been talking about different resources. You've been hearing about some different best practices and models in those CDEs. And as you scroll down here even further, there's a whole section on those different career development experiences that are happening across the state in different contexts, rural, urban, suburban, different industry areas, and how they're really thinking through each of those. So again, as Dania's mentioned multiple times, it really is the communities and you all who help us have these resources and really have this content for you all to learn from each other. So big shout out again to all these pilots who did some really, really thoughtful work last year and continue to do so.
Yeah, and we'll be sure to share this link, this entire presentation, and a few additional resources with you at the end of the presentation as well. So we're nearing the end of our time together here. Before everybody leaves, I want to emphasize, I know that we didn't get to go through all of the facilitation guide together. It's one of those things that we're not entirely sure where everybody's at with the toolkit itself. And so wanting to have people be able to work through it and see some of the steps themselves and go through that chronologically really is a beneficial way to go through that resource. But as you go through it, we want to hear back from you if it's beneficial to you, if you see an edit that needs to be made, if you think that just based on what I've said so far already that you can tell that there's something that's missing or that would be important to you to be a part of it, absolutely give us feedback. There's a link right here for a Google form. Not every single question is required, so you can put in what you need to share. We're here to listen from y'all and learn and be able to make this resource better and more effective so that people can make better CDEs over time. So that'll also be shared with y'all. We do want to hear back. Any honest feedback is incredibly appreciated.
And of course, I just want to say a big shout out to Danya for taking us through this guide, for creating this guide. Her and I have been work-based learning thought partners this whole summer, and she's graciously agreed to keep continuing on and helping with work-based learning. So you'll be definitely seeing more of her throughout the year here, and appreciate the blog posts that they're putting out to you. I would very much encourage you to read those and be thinking through those. There's 2 more coming. So a big shout out to you. Thank you so much.